Hello, Sarah Sabin, executive and team coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am delighted to have with me here today Daniel Rafael, who is founder and CEO of the Lion Group. Daniel, welcome to the show. And could you briefly introduce yourself to my audience?
Thank you for having me. Hello, I'm Daniel, 35 years old, currently living in Miami Beach, Florida. Moved here during COVID, like many other people from New York. I guess for me it was a blessing. I suffer from syndromes of being a workaholic and, chasing external successes and everything in between. And, moving to a place where I was forced to calm down a tiny bit. As much as it was difficult in the beginning, today I can look back at it as, a blessing. In a nutshell, my background goes all the way pretty much to the age of 14 when I completely dropped out of school due to personal issues going on in my family and growing up pretty much on the streets or between, from one relative to another. I found myself very quickly becoming very passionate about just making money so I can survive. So I guess I was somewhat forced to get myself into that system at a quite, early age, which of course, taught me many things in all sorts of areas. And I began by doing stuff from selling cell phones to messenger services on a Vespa, and then I landed myself a pretty decent job at a pretty big advertising firm. And I think when I started, selling advertising and meeting with business owners and obviously connecting with them and selling to them, I think I found my passion by, connecting with people, hearing other people's stories, and of course, sharing mine. I did pretty well in that company until I was about 19 years old. And sadly, that company was part of a bigger umbrella of companies that completely went bankrupt. And very quickly, I found myself, without a job in an era where I never really even sat down to write a resume for myself. So it was quite devastating. And with that devastation, I decided to move to the US and, chase the famous American dream. I had a bit of an advantage because I was born actually in the US to two Israeli parents, and I grew up there until I was around 10 years old. So coming back at 19 was, a world of a difference, but at least, I was a citizen. So, and I had, the language to a certain degree. So as tough as it was, I know for sure that it was tougher also for others, who came from somewhere to the US and whatnot. Yeah, same over there. I started dabbling in all sorts of jobs, restaurants, driving around, delivery services, and I guess the universe has its ways. And once again, I landed myself at an interesting advertising firm. This time it was more in the digital space, which taught me a lot, which I haven't known about because back in Israel it was more doing it in print. And I was there for probably close to 2 years. And towards, I would say, the last 6 months that I was there, I started my side hustle together with a good childhood friend from Israel who I stayed in touch with even as I moved here to the US. And together we began this interesting venture where I was going to retail stores and mainly, branded apparel, footwear, and accessories. I was basically buying retail, trying to convince store managers maybe to give me a discount because I was buying bulk. And I was packing the merchandise, shipping it to Israel. And my partner at the time, good friend today, was selling it out of a basement of where his parents lived in some, building in the middle of nowhere. And slowly but surely, that business kind of exploded. And it forced me to reach a point where I had to do something that back then was very difficult for me to tell my bosses that I think I'm ready to leave the company and start, my own business and go with it full force. And thank God, ever since, I haven't really been looking back. And from one thing to another, things started to pivot pretty much in the same industry. But today, the focus is mainly, Amazon being a significant seller on Amazon and basically using our knowledge and our wisdoms and, of course, all the past experiences, to partner up with top tier brands and act as an extension for them. And they call it brand accelerators in the era of Amazon and e-commerce. And that's in a nutshell what the Lion Group does today, and how I became the Lion Group, and everything in between.
Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. And, you have overcome significant personal and professional challenges to get where you are today. And I'm curious to understand more, when you think about where you are today, as opposed to a few years ago when you first started the Lion Group. What are the most significant challenges you faced in getting the business to its current stage, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Wow, that's a great question. I have so much to say about this topic, but if you ask me today, looking back, probably the biggest challenges are always when I think that I'm running the show and I'm in the driver's seat, and there's no, God, a higher power, whatever you want to call it, who is running the show. I'm grateful that I've learned this lesson still when I'm relatively young, and as tough as it can be at times. I'm grateful, for those experiences. I do think that overcoming challenges, for me, the best way is always to be vulnerable and open, and really to say things as is. And most importantly, urge myself to reach out to help to people, even if it's in my industry or outside of my industry, and say, hey, listen, I'm currently, dealing with this situation. I tried A, B, C, D. It's not really working for me. If you don't mind, maybe to share with me, give me, your perspective. And I find that to be extremely, extremely beneficial. And I always try to, tell my friends, or even my kids. I have 3 young kids, to try to use that as a #1 strategy, because I think that's really the #1 ingredient.
And that's really interesting. So you've realized over the course of time that you're not alone, you don't know everything, and that it actually serves you to learn to rely and be supported by other people in order to achieve your goals faster.
100%. And sometimes these can be implemented also in a very basic way, where internally, in our company, when we have, our teamly weekly meeting, sometimes we try that everyone starts, with their weaknesses, like lead with that, like share what are right now your biggest challenges on your plate. Maybe someone who does completely something else in the company can give you a better perspective, because many times, at least for myself, I also see it, as much as I may be smart and wise and I have experience, but if I'm busy with my day-to-day stuff and it's tedious and consuming at times, it's very hard for me to look from a bird's eye view and see, oh, maybe there is a better solution. It's just because I'm right now stuck in some old pattern. I'm not, capable, to realize that. And then, of course, we also always encourage our team members that if they have a certain issue, which is really taking a lot of them, if it's mentally, physically, or whatever the case may be, let's all as a try to break it down, analyze, what the situation is, what have we tried to do until now, and then brainstorm together and say, okay, let's maybe find a better way. Or if we can't find a better way, maybe it's not worth our time anymore, and it's time just to let go, even if it may be sad to do so. And we really try to encourage and push to do so. And I feel that when you really bring a problem and you try to, analyze it and break it down from every angle and perspective, many times we are able together to really find a much better solution. And then it just becomes part of the natural flow, like the autopilot. And sometimes we look back and, we laugh at ourselves and we say, hey, look, for that last 6 months, it's crazy how we were busy and investing so much time. And now that we found a better solution, it just, became part of the natural flow. So again, that all comes down to, proper communication, the willingness to be vulnerable, the understanding that we're not always going to be great at everything. We could be good at certain things, and it's okay if we're not great at everything. And then, having these open conversations, and of course the, vulnerability and being honest, and really understanding how communication is the #1 ingredient, in my opinion, in any organization. That for itself, opens up all the pathways.
Hmm. And I want to just hone in on two things that you've said. So when you're in the thick of the detail, there's an expression, you can't see the wood for the trees. So it often takes someone else to lift you out of where you are and to look at the bigger picture. And that as well feeds into collaborative problem solving, because different people think in different ways, and that diversity of thinking can also lead to solving problems in a more innovative way than if you were to sit down and try and figure out everything yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't
Mm.
say it better.
So I'm curious to understand more about how you got to where you are today. Some of the things that you've mentioned are core tenets of leadership. Did you always think this way, or has it become something that you've realized over time as you've worked more with people?
That's a good question. So first of all, due to my history and, you know, my past of, growing up on the streets from an early age and, beginning my journey, I was blessed and gifted, multiple opportunities where people were willing to take the risk, and to give me a fair shot against all odds. And as much as that was obviously very comforting for me and it really, allowed me to grow, I never forgot about it. So, the way how I created my company and my company culture and throughout the years as we were hiring more and more and growing, I was very unorthodox, when it came to hiring. And as much as I would always look for someone in particular, and I found it to be, very difficult always to find exactly what I want, at some point I knew that I had to compromise. And once I came to that, agreement in my head, I said, if I'm already compromising, let me try to look for interesting characters, each one on his own, and really give them a fair shot and allow them to feel like they belong. And most importantly, and I feel that that worked a lot and pays dividends, I really allow them to become, their business owner with inside the business. So giving them freedom to really manage their business in the business. Of course, being there for them whenever they need, giving them, enough space where they feel like they can grow, they can make their own mistakes, they can learn on their own. And then, of course, as we continue to grow, to use all the available resources, that we have, company wide. I also feel like it's very, very important, and thankfully this comes to me pretty naturally. I like to connect with my employees first as just humans and friends, and listen, we're in this together. We all, have our lives also outside of work, and it's not like a 9 to 5 environment, clock in, clock out. I'm your boss, you're my employee type of structure, but it's more like, come, this is who we are, this is what's important for us. We hope that you want to share a part of this, and let's all grow together. And I think also when you look at it this way, or at least for myself, things really, play out beautifully. And it also plays out beautifully that many times when you hire the wrong person, it usually takes us less than a week, to smell and realize and recognize that we made a mistake, and we move on and we learn from the mistakes.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because, when you're talking about hiring, if you have a very strong idea of exactly what you're looking for in that person, it becomes clear or clearer who you should hire, but it also enables you to make a very quick decision on who doesn't quite fit into the culture. Because when you're trying to maintain that culture, if you've got too many outliers to it creates confusion around what that culture is meant to be.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Daniel, I'm curious to understand how you've invested in yourself as a leader and what steps you take to grow and evolve as a leader in your role.
Um, a lot of self-work, meaning, for me, I feel that, going back to the age of 15 and having that, fierce and force inside me that if I'm not going to take care of myself, who will? And that obviously led to some amazing stuff and growth, within as far as business goes and, growing a company. But I guess I reached a point where, these defense mechanisms, if you want to call it, somewhat came to an expiration date. And once that happened, that was pretty devastating. As much as I had a lot of external success and, things were going well and business was growing, inside I started to feel more and more empty. So, like many other people, I guess, in the world, and, people like to use the word, journey a lot. I got into my own personal journey of trying to understand, who am I and why am I really here and what do I want for myself, and everything in between. So that led to a lot of self-work, from therapy to hundreds of other types of stuff. And at one point I felt like there's no really, there's no other way. And, the more I started digging and the more I tried to understand, the more I saw how much work needs to be involved. So today I have a balance, I would say 50-50 between doing self-work and then, everything else. So I would never change that. I think that's supposed to be part of, my daily routine. And I think, the more I grow with internal stuff, it naturally, flows also on the external. And then, of course, and I think this is the most important aspect, is that I started to learn that external success is not as that important, which I thought it was. And it's not all about that. It's really the opposite.
That is so interesting. And I just want to hone in on that point, that leadership begins with self-leadership. And in order to lead yourself, you need to take the work on yourself seriously. And I think, a lot of people don't necessarily make that connection, but I like that you've given it a split of, well, 50% is this and 50% is work on myself. Because as you say, the deeper you go, it's just layers of an onion, and you're dealing with one layer, you take it off, there's another layer and another layer and another layer. And our work is never really done in that aspect.
Absolutely. They say it only ends once we leave this world.
Yes, and there are many schools of thought on what happens then, but we won't go into that today. Daniel, final question. If you could go back in time and you could give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Patience for sure. Trying to really, it's funny. I ask myself this question all the time, but when I realistically go back to 20, I'm like, yeah, that's very cute advice, but I probably would never follow it. I think, that life does what life knows how to do to get everyone to, reach these types of conclusions. But in short, definitely to reach out more and, be vulnerable and be honest and try to ask for help, whenever needed. And I think there's many ways of help, and sometimes, the mind has a way of blocking or giving reasons why not to ask for help. But I see it even upon myself. Sometimes people reach out to me and they ask for help, and sometimes I'll just stop what I'm doing and I'll be with them for as long as they need me, because I just enjoy doing it more than closing that next deal. So I'm only assuming how people would feel back then when I was 20, if I had the ability to understand, that concept, more in depth. Patience is definitely something very big. I would tell my younger self, you have to start building those muscles and understand that, big things take time, and there's really no real shortcuts in life. And real things and big things really take a lot of time and a lot of consistency. And then, of course, I would also tell myself that it's not about, the destination. It's really about the journey, and enjoy the journey and stop, to smell the roses and appreciate, what you have become until now, and not just look to reach, that next destination. And then we know how that goes. You reach it and you're like, okay, this is cool and fun. And after a few days or weeks or months, I'm not excited about it anymore. And then what's next? And then it basically puts you in that whole rat hole of, the race of chasing more and more and more and more.
Yes, and compulsive goal chasing is a thing amongst high performing people, and the hit you feel from it is gone very soon because you're already on to the next thing, unless you stop to use your phrasing, to smell the roses along the way.
Yep.
Daniel, thank you for sharing so honestly and openly and vulnerably today. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Pleasure. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Awesome. And my listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to be a part of the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series, please do reach out to me.